I'm going to hit record and we'll start the meeting. So at 4:30 p.m. I'm going to call this meeting to order. I know in advance that Patricia cannot be here with us today. Does anyone want to volunteer to take the minutes for today?
I've never done it before, so why not?
That's awesome. Thank you, Craig. All right, so the first thing to do would be to note that we convened the meeting at 4:30, and just moving to the agenda. Welcome to our first regular meeting. It being a regular meeting, the next item on our agenda is to amend if necessary, and then to accept the agenda. Does anyone have anything to add to the agenda?
Sent you something, Connie, from the Northwest Transit District, seeking the letter, asking for funds. Not something that has to be discussed today, but I just wanted to let you know.
Yeah, I saw that came through, and you know, Barbara was good enough to make sure that a couple of other requests that have come through over the last week got added to our folder. I suppose we should discuss those requests as a group at some point. Do you want to do that today, or do you want to add that to the agenda for a different meeting?
I think it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea to have a very brief discussion about these documents that are coming in so that we're all on the same page and we know what we're doing with them.
Okay, great. So let's put, let's add it after 5, old business. Let's add number 6. And that is just a brief discussion on I'll call them unsolicited requests for lack of a better name, but that doesn't mean they're unwelcome. It just means that they're coming in a different manner than the information that we're gathering on the survey and at the focus groups. Okay, so with that, does anyone else have any other items to add to the agenda? And if not, then I'll entertain a motion to accept the agenda.
So moved.
Thanks, Barbara. Anyone second?
Second.
Thanks, Glenn. All in favor, please raise your hand.
Aye.
And if any are opposed, raise your hand. And seeing none, that motion carries. So the next item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from last week's meeting, which was February 9th, 2022. Patricia circulated the minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review? And if so, is there a need for any amendments? And if not, I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Thanks, Barbara. Joe, do you want a second?
Yes.
Okay, great. All in favor, please raise your hand. And if any are opposed, please raise your hand. And seeing none, that motion carries. Great. The next item on the agenda is public comment, and there are no members of the public joining us for this meeting today. So we're going to move right into old business. And I kind of flip-flopped the order so that we could hear first about outreach and one-on-one meetings. And I believe, Barbara, that you've had your meeting now with the fire department. So why don't we start with your report out?
Okay, so they met last night at 7. I think there were, I wrote it down somewhere, how many people were there? Hold on. 15 participants on Zoom and 7 participants were in person. 2 of the people on Zoom, one was me, one was Joe. Joe attended the meeting as well. I started off with a brief overview and then explained what our committee's goals are in very broad terms, and then asked each of the chiefs, the fire chief and the ambulance chief, to make statements, and then I opened it up to the whole body of people. So it was interesting. It didn't seem like a lot of the people really participated in the discussion portion of it, but the two chiefs had a lot to say. And I took a lot of notes, and Joe even asked a question or two for some clarification. And the first chief that spoke was the fire chief, and he really had quite a bit of information prepared. And he put a lot of thought into how COVID has impacted their operations and their ability to respond. But the bottom line, and I think maybe Joe can collaborate on this, is that the need for equipment and upgrading their equipment seems to be the highest priority of theirs. Their fundraising was impacted somewhat. Their training was impacted quite a bit, but they've transitioned to online training. But basically, they talked about their communication equipment a lot and how it doesn't work well. And so that's partly an equipment problem, and it's partly a not internet, but broadband or whatever the towers are that they use. They said that their staffing requirements were brought to a head by COVID, because when COVID hit, a lot of their responders were more than timid to go out and respond, not knowing what the consequence to them personally was going to be. That has somewhat subsided, but their need for staffing is still increasing, and they've made a big ask to the town to be included in this year's budget. They talked about the ambulance revenue and the decrease. I guess in general, the taxpayers or our citizens were a little reluctant to be calling the ambulance during COVID. You know, because we've all been hearing that we need to social distance and stay away from one another. So I think everybody was taking that to extremes. What else did they say? Yeah, it's mostly about equipment. I mean, I took 3 pages of notes, so I'm more than willing to write that up. I tried to ask very directly about the mental health impact, and they did agree that anxiety is a big problem on all sides of the spectrum, on the citizens, on the responders, on every side of the spectrum, but they didn't really have a thought process on how to address that concern. It was mostly about their radios and their equipment, their heart, whatever those things are called that shock people's hearts. So the whole thing went about an hour, and there was a little bit of give and take. I don't know. Do you have anything to add to that, Joe?
Yes, Barbara. Yeah, basically, you covered just about everything that happened, but my impression was that I found the whole discussion very telling, in that the people that spoke, I don't really know the exact positions, but Alan Gowell, Bonnie Densella, Eric Epstein, and Maryland I'm not really sure her last name, but anyhow, these people, what they discussed, it was just to briefly outline, basically what you had said, but just to to briefly say something. But they mentioned their fundraising being impacted by the pandemic, their staffing being impacted, and their training, and the discussion about their equipment being outdated. That kind of made a big impression on me, and the fact that some of their equipment is so sparse that they have to share some of their equipment, and the cost of some of the defibrillators mentioned was anywhere, they ranged from $1,800 to $2,100 each. Anyway, I really, I thought there was a lot of information that was presented that would be of importance to this committee. It actually, if there is a recording that was made of that meeting last night, I really think it would be, as well as a report, which you know, mentioned about preparing. Anyway, if there was a recording so everyone on this committee can listen to, you know, to how the pandemic affected them, I think that would be of great benefit to the committee. But overall, I really think we got a lot of information last night from the meeting.
It was recorded. I'm not sure where those recordings get posted. I don't know if they get posted on the town website. I did try to ask a couple of follow-up questions, especially about the equipment when Eric Epstein was talking, and asked if they can make a correlation between the lack of or the diminished amount of fundraising and their need for equipment. Is their need for equipment directly related to their lack of fundraising? And I didn't get the impression that that was the case at all.
Oh,
Well, you know, Barbara, it's interesting. Like this is a question that has been bubbling up in my mind in connection with a bunch of different issues that have been raised with this committee, and I think at some point it would be really helpful for our committee to know from you, because you have special knowledge of this, a little bit more about how things work with respect to the town budget for some of the things that we've been discussing, and, you know, like what would it be usually? So that is the question that would come to my mind, is if there had been no COVID, would the fundraising that the fire department would normally do have covered, you know, some of the needs for new equipment? I think that the fire department is important enough to our town that probably people in our community would agree that the fire department should have adequate equipment. But my question always is, you know, where would this normally have come from had we not had COVID? Would this be a town budgetary issue? You know, would things like the recreational facilities that people keep telling us about and clamoring for, you know, would those things have normally been covered in our town budget? And if so, you know, what does it mean that people are asking for ARPA funds to cover them?
Well, I think that's a big question. And part of it, or part of my initial response to it is, even if some of these items could be covered or are normally covered in a town budget, they're also allowable uses under the ARPA expenditure requirements. And I think that enough of that information has gotten out into the general public so that they know that. And that's might be part of why
broadly, the town revenues are more or less the same, and it was the spending, I don't think has really changed very much, but you would know better than I.
I'm not sure I understand the question, but there are.
So if there's shortfalls at certain parts of the town of Kent that maybe normally would have been covered by the town, but I'm just wondering whether that would be likely to be true, given that our revenues are about the same.
Okay, so let's stay talking about the fire department. 3 years ago, the fire department was 100% volunteer fire and ambulance. They started to see that they were having difficulty with getting volunteers to staff their ambulance services for all the time periods that need to be covered. And they came to the town and they said, we're having trouble. We don't have enough volunteers. We just want you to be aware of this. Then COVID hit, and all of a sudden they definitely didn't have enough volunteers. And the town, actually it was before COVID hit, or right before COVID hit. I think it was that January town meeting. We went to a special town meeting, made a special appropriation, and appropriated for the first time additional funds just for emergency staffing for the ambulance. and I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but I want to say that first appropriation was around $60,000, give or take. Then they came back to the town and in last year's budget, got in the budget in earnest for this same staffing problem. And it was double that because it was for the full year instead of half the year. At this point, we're a little bit over half the year. They've already used almost 70% of that budget. They're probably going to come back to the town for more money for this staffing before the end of this fiscal year. And currently the appropriation that they've asked for the next fiscal year, the budget that we're working on right now, is 3 times what they've asked for in the past. So this problem has started and been exacerbated by COVID and is now through the roof.
I'd like to ask Barbara, last night, just to verify if I heard this correctly or not, but I believe Bonnie Denzella mentioned that they had a revenue loss of $37,000. Was that correct?
Well, yes and no. A couple of years before they started having the shortfall with the volunteers, they decided to charge for their ambulance services. So if you call the ambulance and you have insurance, they will bill your insurance. If you don't have insurance, then it's the same as it would have been before. They don't bill you for the service. But if you do have insurance, they bill your insurance. And so they've been getting revenue from that stream, insurance reimbursements. So that's what she was talking about. She went all the way back she went 3 years backwards. And in 2019, their revenue was $183,000 from their ambulance billings. They had 303 patients that were transported to the hospital, and there were 428 calls. And then she jumped to the next year for fiscal year 20. Their revenue dropped down to 146,000. These are insurance reimbursements. They only transported 216 people to the hospital, and they had 341 calls. So everything's going down, the revenue, the number of people transported, the number of calls. This past year, they had $143,000 worth of revenue. 253 people were transported. So the numbers of people being transported is going back up. And the number of calls is going back up. It went up to 395. So there's been some fluctuation with what the requirements have been on them. So that's what you're thinking of. And she said it was a $30,000 loss from the first year that they were doing the billing from 183,000, but
Oh, okay.
that's what that was about.
So that $37,000 figure was not directly related to the pandemic.
I would agree with that.
Okay.
Could you talk about where the biggest needs for equipment are? I heard defibrillators, but what's the most immediate needs? And
Their radio communications. They need new radios. They need new booster towers. I'm guessing, I don't know what those things are called, but one example that was given is Marianne Van Valkenburg, who lives up on Route 7 on the way to Cornwall. She got called in for a call. On the way into town, somebody stopped her because somebody else had a need, and she stopped, and her radio could not communicate with the firehouse from where she was. And that isn't because the radio didn't work, it was because there was no booster connector type thing. But they've been talking about that for a while. That isn't something that was created by COVID.
Would it be possible to invite some of the people from the fire department and EMD to come to one of the meetings to kind of clarify everything that they discussed last night?
I think they would
It
be
might
happy to.
Yeah. I mean, it might be a good idea to do that, as we get a little further along, just because remember, we're not actually allocating
Right.
or deciding on any of this,
Right.
but I think it would be important to share with the fire department what we're thinking and get their feedback at some point. And of course, we do plan on doing a public forum, but it might be something, given the need and the responses that we got on the surveys showing our community's appreciation for the fire department, it might be a good idea to have them here before that.
One of the things that Joe did ask, he asked, I think, Alan, if there could be a list created of the equipment that they need.
Exactly.
So, and they said they would do that. So Joe had already asked for that. And since you brought it up, Connie, I want to talk about it just a little bit about what our final presentation is going to look like. Because I know you said that we aren't going to be allocating funds, but I'm not sure I agree with that. I think that the recommendations we make should include some financial parameters, so that, and this is just my thought process, but I'm thinking that our final presentation to the Board of Selectmen should be anywhere from 15 to 20 recommendations, and that they could go through those recommendations and rank them and prioritize them, and then bring that to the Board of Finance, and then subsequently to a town meeting if that's how they decide to do it. So I think it is important to talk about dollars.
Yeah. Okay. I think that makes sense, Barbara. I mean, I started to think about, just very skeletally what it might look like, for our report. And I know that we're going to want to explain our methodology. I know that we're going to want to, have in there information that Joe and others have collected about what other towns have done, just so our community, knows that we're not working in a vacuum, and that we took notice of what nearby communities were doing. But yes, I did envision that we would be making some recommendations, and that those might include actual numbers. So yeah.
I totally agree with what Barbara has said. And I think we owe it to the selectmen to give them this information as to how we arrived at our recommendations. I mean, I realize that we're not making any decisions on this matter, but I think we owe it to them as to how we arrived at our conclusions.
Sure.
I think
Just on the fire department for a second, the radio communications, the signal booster things that they need, I think that clearly falls under what we're allowed, even though it's not a new ARPA related need. If communications infrastructure is allowed and pretty much anything emergency related is allowed, it seems like it would fall, well within the purview of what the town would be allowed to spend on.
Well, one of the categories is to support the public health response. So when you think about it from that perspective, absolutely, radios and heart shockers and all of that is a response for the public health. So I think those are definitely, you can connect the breadcrumbs between their need and ARPA funding for that. And I
feel that go ahead, Barbara.
Sorry, Alan did have a written thing that he was reading from, so maybe I'll just reach out to him and ask him if he can give that to us. That might be easier for everybody.
Great. Well, thank you. That sounds like some really helpful work that you did last night, and I'm glad that the meeting went well, and look forward to talking that through some more. Craig, I saw that the PDO meeting is canceled for this evening, so that's unfortunate. Did they reschedule?
They haven't rescheduled it yet. You saw also the correspondence related to the BOE guy, and then Michelle Mott reached out to me. So I'm having a meeting with Michelle. I think it's 11 o'clock tomorrow, maybe 1 o'clock on the phone. I was hoping to have the PTO meeting first, but we'll just have it with Michelle first and then with the PTO. So that's where that stands. It's just postponed essentially.
Great.
And-
Thank you for that.
Then just since I'm talking anyway, so I did. Darlene Brady sent me a list of real estate transactions, and then on Monday, Karen Chase has given me a list of the new voter registrations, and I could compare those two to try to guess. Okay, this is a new resident. And then the voter registrations give you email and phone numbers, so I can reach out to them. And do we feel like we'll have enough new residents if we have 5, if we have 10? What would be it's an adequate?
I think 5 should do. 5 would be great. If you can get 5, that'd be awesome.
Okay.
Thank you. Good work on that.
Just so you know, Michelle is going to be part of our group too.
Okay, and actually, so I had this interaction with Michelle and the email that came in from the Board of Ed. I do wonder a little bit about if you're part of the town, like the Board of Education, are you advocating for ARPA money via us or via the first selectman? Like it doesn't seem like it's part of our purview to go and interview board, but parts of the town to see what they need. But I don't know.
Aren't we the conduit between those and the selectmen? So that's what I thought.
I don't know why. Okay.
I assume that's why.
But I would think the Board of Ed would just go directly in. But.
Well, no, the Board of Ed would get in touch with us if they had needs that they felt that ARPA funds from our town could cover. And we really felt that in many ways we needed to understand better, what the schools were getting outside of the municipal funding and what their additional needs might be that might be covered by municipal funding. So I think all of this is proper. I know that there's a lot of overlap, but I think it just helps inform our understanding of the whole. And focus groups are they're a different beast entirely. So part of the thing about focus groups is that there's something that happens that is unique to being in a room with other people and considering questions. So the thought development and the understanding of the people in the room is all kind of part of that, that vibe, I guess. So I think that we may get some, duplicate information, but I also think that it's just fine that you'll meet with Michelle individually, meet with the PTO, and Ruth, that Michelle will be part of your group on social services.
Okay.
Connie, can I just ask, because I'm sort of new here, do you have a timeline? Are we talking? I just wonder at what point we say, this is it, we've got to get a report out and start dispersing the money.
Well, I mean, the timeline is actually pretty long, and I think none of us really envisions that will take the full time that we could, but the first tranche of the money doesn't even have to be allocated until the end of 2023. Isn't that right, Barbara? 2024. So if we needed to, we don't even have to allocate it for another, right? So I don't think any of us envisions that, and I also think that we take really seriously this charge and want to do it right. So we don't want to leave anyone hanging who, desperately needs funding. And so I think that's kind of the impetus for getting on this as quickly as we can, but we should take our time to do it right.
So, but I mean, having some type of time frame, like, because we'll be done with the focus groups at the end of March. We'll be done with our outreach, presumably at the end of March. So could we write a report in the month of April? And
I would hope. I'm just comparing, and I know we're not supposed to compare to other towns, but they're starting to give out funds to people who really need them. And I would like to see us start, or at least move ahead to recommend to the selectmen.
Well, could I just answer, reply to like some of Ruth's what she was mentioning on some of this. Anyhow, following what some of the other towns are doing, as you mentioned before, Ruth, is that some towns have said that they don't want to review the applications for funding until they see all of them, which is, an approach that they have. But getting back to the what was said earlier, in that you asked about a timeline, is that a few other locations, what they have done is that they've kind of organized where where their things that would be allocated in the first grouping of funds. This way here, when the second grouping comes in, they're starting, I guess, from square one. I don't know if that's an organized approach to doing something like that. I just mention it because this is what some other locations are doing, rather than just to be overwhelmed with with the total amount of money and having to go through everything. That, as far as timelines, I don't know if that makes any sense or not.
I was just trying to dip into our shared drive. And Barbara, can you remind me where that South Windsor methodology is located in the shared drive? Because that would be, I think that it would be great if we could all take a look at that and, see how that's being mobilized. I think, Joe, you raised a good point that, that the money is coming in 2 tranches. It may be that we feel more comfortable, allocating some of the funds, knowing that there'll be another infusion of funds. But I think that's probably beyond the scope of what we're able to talk about tonight.
Does anyone think it's reasonable that we could wrap up the report in a month after getting the most of our input through the survey, the focus group?
That's reasonable.
Okay.
So the erase grant information is in the folder for environmental scans because it's what somebody else is doing.
Okay, thanks. That makes sense. All right, should we move on from Craig? Glenn, did you have an update on your work?
I do, yes. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to write it up and put it in the drive, but I did today speak with Mr. Ian Striever, the principal of Houstonic Valley Regional High School. We had a very productive conversation, and I discovered that that Houstonic has received ARPA funds already, ARPA ESSER funds. And I had seen that acronym before. I asked him, well, what does that stand for? We both didn't know. I just looked it up as we were speaking, Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. So I think it's a part of the whole ARPA Act. And they received, I didn't ask exactly how much they received, but they received money already and they've spent it. And they spent it last year. And they thought that, I think they hired an extra social worker. They felt that they needed some extra help with the kids' anxiety. He talked a lot about emotional, just the emotional and mental health aspect of the students. And they went for a social worker, and they also made upgrades to the HVAC system in the building. So I guess that was part of what they did. And then I just asked, what other effects of the pandemic have you seen? And he talked about how difficult it is in terms of just quantifying data, whether it's grades or SAT scores. He felt that students have more difficulty in math, that there was a lot of Zoom when the pandemic started, and it's very difficult to teach math on Zoom, such as this. I told him I agreed. He talked about how there's less participation in sports. Some kids do not want to play sports in masks. There was that kind of deal. But he felt that, and then also their international trips that they do, and those were canceled. So whether it's international trips or other kind of field trip type of things. So he was keenly aware of how, kids these days feel a little isolated in their schools. I mean, I told him about Marvel's experience. But he also felt that the students are really coming together, that they've had bonfires and homecomings, and he just felt that the kids are really coming together because they don't want to do anything wrong to stop bonfires and homecomings from occurring. So he felt their behavior was actually up. But it was, and then, I talked a little bit about what the other three schools talked about, safety issues, walking around with Kent, and kind of park and rec kind of issues, doing things, for the kids, sports wise. And he felt that too. He felt that just this generalized need for connection. And he encouraged me to keep talking to him. So the private schools and the public schools should keep talking. And he didn't know the number, and I didn't know the number either. I should have, but I asked him how many Kent students, go to Houstonic these days, and he did say that Kent is, as a town, usually sends, the least amount, or close to a small amount because of the distance. So I'll try to get that number. And then I asked him, had any other ARPA assessment committees from those towns reached out? And he said, no, we were the first. And he appreciated that. So that's what I discovered. Craig, I hope that helps you when you talk to the.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. I'm taking notes.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing that. I think that was an important component, Glenn.
Absolutely. No, it's a great idea. It was a great conversation, and I hope to keep in contact with Ian. It was nice.
Good. Maybe we started something here.
A connection.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
That's great. All right. Well, thank you very much for doing that work. Barbara, you're off for putting together written notes, or if you find that Alan's communication adequately summarizes, that's fine too. But if there could be some written documentation, that'd be helpful. Glenn, for you as well. And Craig, we look forward to hearing what you learn next week. Are you okay with moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is our focus group planning?
I'm okay.
Okay. Joe?
Yeah. Could I just ask if there's been any movement or anything with the Chamber of Commerce?
Let's pull that.
They haven't been back to me on the focus groups. So nothing new since last week.
Okay, so then so we're into the focus groups. So
I think we're into the focus groups.
Kent Falls wants to participate. Should I sign them up as specialty, retail, restaurant?
I think that they would be in I don't know. I think they would be more in like the hospitality.
Yeah.
They could go to either one.
Right. Okay.
But that's great. That's great.
Yeah, I didn't mention this last week at the last week's meeting, but in any case, I did hear from Marge Smith from the Historical Society, and she had mentioned how she would like her and her two new staff members would like to come to the focus group. So I figured I'd just throw it out there to see,
I'm interested in her rationale for the two new staff members.
I honestly don't, I didn't ask. I mean, she just mentioned that I guess maybe as a delegation or something from the Historical Society, maybe in that sense.
I may reach out to her and just talk with her about that. I mean, I just, my reaction is that it might be helpful for the 2 new staff members to know people from town that are working in other nonprofits, but those people are unlikely to be able to give much insight on impacts to the historical society that are due to the COVID pandemic.
Do you need her email address to
Yeah, we're connected. I can reach out to
Okay.
her. Thank you.
So, and then since we're waiting on the Chamber of Commerce with the retail and restaurants, I mean, it's not like there's that many, there's a lot of retail, but there's not that many restaurants. We could just start calling them. I don't know that we need to wait for the Chamber of Commerce.
But let's give them another, week to get it together, because they have kind of put the call out, soliciting people to see if they'd be interested.
Right.
And so I want to, they did it by email, but they also did it publicly at a chamber meeting, which was at the beginning of this month. So, I think that the reason that we tossed it to them in the first place was because we felt that it would be difficult for us to invite absolutely everyone, and that seems maybe not fair. And so, let's wait and see if they get interested people. And if they don't get people interested, I think it would be fine for us to make, outreach to people that we're connected with and ask them to participate. Are there any other updates on the focus groups? And I don't know if, I can't remember when this happened, but I did set up the Zooms for at least for 2 of the meetings. And Barbara, if you want to set up the others, and then I don't know where we should park maybe I'll just make a Word document so that we can put the information in it, or maybe actually just, I think I might have already done this in that focus group planning document in the shared file. We can put the information, the links and all of that. All right, well, let's talk for a few minutes then on this, on the item that we added to the agenda, which is about, what our approach is right now to the letters and the requests that we're getting from, various organizations or individuals, for the ARPA funds. Barbara.
I was thinking that it might be helpful to actually start some sort of a spreadsheet and just log them in with what they're requesting, what their connection to the COVID pandemic is. And then at some point when we get ready to do our report, we can, as a group, review all of them and decide which ones or all of them, or if any, that we're going to include as recommendations. I mean, these people that are reaching out to us, for the most part, seem to already know that the things that they're requesting are qualifying expenditures or uses of the money, and they have specific reasons. Some of them are direct impact to our community. Some are sort of local, but not directly just our community, but our surrounding area. But we did get one from the DPW foreman who wants to have funds allocated to the highway garage, because currently their break room is, they're having their breaks in the highway, in the garage, I was
really surprised by that, I have to say.
It sounds horrible.
For 2 years, meeting in a garage, that's
with their coats on to eat their lunch. So I don't know. There's a lot of requests.
Yeah, I think a spreadsheet is a great idea. I don't know if you're like the spreadsheet wizard, Barbara. You seem pretty good at it, but I don't want to volunteer you to do it. Does anyone, want to offer to put together such a spreadsheet, and we can all check to make sure that everything's on?
Yeah, I don't have a problem doing it. And then I'll start a new folder in the drive for it. I don't think I got the one from Northwest Transit though. I don't know.
It just came today.
I
Oh,
just
Ruth
sent
sent
that.
it just before the meeting, and I hadn't
Okay.
had time to forward it on yet. So I'll forward it to the committee email address so that you all see it.
Okay, because
I
we
just got
have
that
one
today.
from United Way, from HVA, from the DPW garage. We have one from the land use office who wants computers. So there's a handful of them for
Yeah.
sure.
Now, I know with at least some of these, we have sent something back just acknowledging the fact that we received their correspondence. Have we done that with everyone? Is there something else that we'd like to say? Where are we on that? Because it does, feel like we want to make sure that it's not like people are communicating into a vacuum.
So
I told Craig that we had gotten it when I got it. We had a meeting today, and he had said he had sent the letter out, but he hadn't heard from anybody from Kent. So I asked him to send it again. He did. And I responded and said, we got it. So he knows we're okay there.
I'm
Let me
thinking
just
that,
say out loud on this meeting, just to give clarification to the rest of you who haven't seen it. And for me, I only saw the subject line because I was rushing from one place to another. But what Ruth is talking about is Craig Nelson, who is from Warren, had sent this, I think, initially to Gene Speck. And that's what, when she's saying that he said he hadn't received any word, that's what she's talking about there. So thanks for letting him know that we have it, Ruth.
so my suggestion is that as I create the spreadsheet, I reach out to everybody I put on that spreadsheet with a sort of a canned response saying, we do have this information. And I already did this to some people, but there's been a few that have just come in the last 2 or 3 days. The HVA one was actually it was another email about it. I'd already responded to her once, United Way, and then the DPW garage, and now the Northwest Transit. And I'll just come up with some sort of a response that says we've received it. We are a committee that's compiling information, so we are going to include your information in our final report and go from there.
Good. That's fine.
Okay. I think that's
Thank
good.
you for doing that. Yeah.
Great. Anything else on that for now?
And so then just further down the road, we would go through each of these requests and discuss the particulars of those.
Yeah, I think it'll be helpful when we have the spreadsheet for us to be able to, understand them all together, right? Because we have, you may need to click into each and read a letter that's 2 to 3 pages long, and that's fine. And they are all, the ones that have come in have been pretty clear and good, but it's hard to hold all of that, in the forefront of your brain. So I think that the spreadsheet will be really helpful. And when it comes time for us to discuss them, to have that as our kind of our guide would be good.
Yep.
All right, great. Well, so next steps for next meetings, the agenda will be pretty similar for next week. We'll get to hear from Craig about what he's learned, and we'll be a lot closer to actually doing our focus groups, so we can continue to work really hard to fill out those focus groups. Thank you to Craig and to Joe and Ruth for all your work that you put in already filling these out, and I think that's it for today. Did I miss anything?
You forgot to thank Glenn.
And and Glenn, I was specifically speaking about filling out our focus groups at that point.
Arpa for doing all she does.
I don't want to miss anyone when I say thanks for all of the work that you've done for this committee. And I especially think that we've been starting to really get our momentum going here, and that feels good. So I hope that you share that feeling, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
Great. Okay. Bye, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Meeting is adjourned at 5:20.